Good Wednesday morning, everybody. I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
And I'm Ellison Barber. Joe and Savannah are off today. Right now on Morning News Now, far from over, that's the word from Senate Democrats as Republicans shut down comprehensive voting reform. We'll bring you reaction from the White House as some of the Hill's top Democrats work to rebuild a landmark legislation.
Falling short, a COVID concession from the White House. The Biden administration won't meet its ambitious vaccination goal by July 4th. This as Dr. Anthony Fauci sounds the alarm on the rapidly spreading Delta variant. His new warning just ahead.
What comes next? This week, NBC News takes a closer look at the future of policing in America. In the spotlight today, use of force inside the startling hospitalization rate of one of California's police departments and how trust can be rebuilt among the community.
And commuter concerns. Offices across the country are coming back to life, and workers are once again facing that dreaded daily commute after a year at home. We'll let you in on all the latest anxiety-inducing hurdles that could trip up your next trip to the office. First, though, we'll get to the latest on the coronavirus in just a second, including some disturbing news about a new variant called Delta Plus.
Yeah, but we begin with the Senate's failure to advance a voting rights bill. It comes as President Biden faces a critical week for his legislative agenda. The president called the voting rights legislation a top priority, and despite the loss, Democrats say they are down but not out. Meanwhile, the White House is working to move on, quietly pushing forward with an infrastructure plan and an effort to target gun violence. It's our lead story, and we're covering it from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue with NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell and NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Leanne, let's start with you on this. What issues did Republicans have with this bill, and what, if anything, can Democrats do now for voting rights reform?
Good morning, Ellison. So Republicans remained opposed and united in that opposition to this legislation. And overwhelmingly, they say that this is a federal takeover of the elections. And so it's something that they cannot support. Even the two who are most likely to support it, Senator Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, went to the Senate floor to speak in opposition of this legislation. The Democrats, while they lost this vote because it did not get the 60 votes required, they did get a small victory in that all Democrats were united in favor of this legislation. They gained the support of Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who was reluctant for a while to support this procedural motion. He ended up voting with the Democrats. Now Democrats can say that they are opposed, that only Republicans have blocked this measure. Now, while they did lose this vote, Democrats are insisting that the fight is not over. Let's listen to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line. Let me say that again. In the fight for voting rights, this vote was the starting gun, not the finish line.
So what can Democrats do? That's a little unclear. There's going to be ramped up pressure for Democrats to get rid of the filibuster, but they don't have the votes for that either. Democrats are also talking about a litigation strategy in the states and in the federal government, and instilling the Justice Department to use all resources necessary to ensure fair and accurate voting at the polls. But legislatively, it's going to be a very tough battle, Ellison.
And Monica, Vice President Harris was actually in the Senate chamber for this vote. Tell us, how did she respond to its failure, and what, if anything, has President Biden said?
And remember, this is just something on her plate that is full of many different homework assignments from the president. Voting rights was added just last month. So she has been talking behind the scenes with lawmakers, trying to see also with voting rights advocates and groups how this could advance. But she was also not very optimistic about obviously what was going to unfold yesterday. But she is saying she has hope for the future, and that in the words of the Senate Majority Leader as well, this battle is just beginning. Take a listen to her response after the measure failed.
It is clear, certainly, for the American people, that when we're talking about the right to vote, it is not a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It is an American concern. This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The issue here is there actual access to the voting process, or is that being impeded? And the bottom line is that the President and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the fight is not over.
The timeline for this, remember, Ellison and Aaron, was supposed to be the month of June. Obviously, very little runway left if we look at it in terms of that. So this will stretch on into the summer, but the path forward is unclear, though President Biden did release a statement echoing a lot of what the vice president said, but in perhaps a clue of where this goes next. He said he would have a lot more to say on this topic starting next week. So perhaps they will have an event at the White House. Some critics had argued that President Biden didn't say enough when it came to voting rights, that he'd been talking so much about infrastructure, about COVID, of course, hosting those lawmakers at the White House. They were urging him to get more involved, and perhaps that's what we're going to see in a more concentrated way next week.
Yeah, I mean, a lot going on. You mentioned infrastructure, Leanne. White House officials are set to host top Democrats for more infrastructure talks. Where do those stand right now? And is there any hope of a deal here?
Well, Ellison, that's right. Top White House officials are meeting with Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer this evening about infrastructure. While that is happening, we also have these bipartisan negotiations that are still ongoing, also meeting with White House officials. But that bipartisan plan hit a major snag yesterday after meeting with White House officials all day long. Republicans came out pretty deflated because the White House took off more ways to pay for it off the table, including a highway infrastructure bank, repurposing COVID funds. And so they are really running out of options that the two sides can agree on how to pay for this legislation. And that has always been the biggest sticking point. And so if they can't agree how to pay for it, then this deal is going to fall apart. And again, they don't have a lot of time. Meanwhile, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer are going to meet with White House officials on what is likely to be a partisan package that Democrats can pass alone, something that's going to be much bigger, and that Democrats could much more easily agree how to pay for it, Ellison.
And Monica, the White House has also released new details on the president's plan to address the rise in gun violence nationwide. What is he hoping to do with that?
Later today, the White House is really going to be hosting this larger event with key stakeholders in this issue. And then both the president and the attorney general are going to unveil what they're calling their comprehensive strategy to try to tackle the rise in not just gun violence, but crime nationwide. And what they're going to propose is that each state really make a decision for themselves, leaving this to the local level, but to dip into some of the money that comes from the American Rescue Plan, more than $350 billion that has been allocated at the more local level for people, if police departments want to hire more officers, if they want to pay more overtime, for instance, that they could use that. But this is going to be really the beginning of it. Remember, of course, a couple of months ago, the president unveiled his executive actions at gun violence and really gun safety methods. So that's something we might hear a little bit more on today, because they feel that's a huge part of this problem. But there is a big concern in the White House heading into these summer months, as we've seen these crime rates tick up, that's going to be a huge problem. So they're trying to get out in front of it today by laying out some of the issues and some of the things they feel they can do at the federal level, though, again, they are deferring a lot to these counties and municipalities to decide what's best for them when it comes to this.
All right, voting rights, infrastructure, gun violence, a lot of very important issues. Very busy week, I am sure, for both of you. Thank you so much, Leanne and Monica, for keeping us informed.
The White House says it will likely not meet President Biden's July 4th COVID vaccination goal. The COVID task force conceding that the nation will fall short of the president's target of 70% of adults with at least one dose. Right now, nearly 66% of adults are partially vaccinated. Health officials say younger adults are behind the slowdown in vaccinations. Younger people are also more likely to get infected with that more contagious Delta variant, now accounting for more than 20% of new cases in the U.S.
Similar to the situation in the UK, The Delta variant is currently the greatest threat in the U.S. to our attempt to eliminate COVID-19.
NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett is following the latest on the pandemic for us this morning. Maura, first I want to talk to you about President Biden's vaccination goal. What's the White House saying now about missing that benchmark on the deadline he set?
Good morning, Aaron. Well, first, the White House is working to remind the country that Americans are going to be able to celebrate the 4th of July in a much different way than we could have even imagined when Biden first took office earlier this year. So they're definitely reminding of that, but also acknowledging that they are going to miss what they are calling an ambitious goal. We heard from Press Secretary Jen Psaki yesterday where she detailed the demographic that she sees the reason behind this for. Take a listen to what she said.
We've seen it's been a great deal more difficult to get young people between the ages of 18 and 26 vaccinated than adults who are older than that. Again, we are already meeting the goal of vaccinating with one dose 70% of Americans 30 years of age and older, and we are working toward meeting it for all adults as soon as possible.
The second portion of Biden's vaccination goal was to get 160 million Americans vaccinated. This past weekend, the country hit 150 million fully vaccinated people, adults, and the White House estimating that they will get to that goal by mid-July, even though we're seeing this drop in those daily vaccination rates.
So, Maura, we also just heard Dr. Anthony Fauci call the Delta variant the country's greatest threat right now. What else are we learning about that particular strain?
Right. And like you said, we're seeing about 20% of new cases in America attributed to that Delta variant. That's up from 10% just 2 weeks ago. And Dr. Walensky, the CDC director, is warning that this variant is more transmissible than the other variants that we've seen. Dr. Fauci saying that it actually mimics a similar pattern to what we saw from another variant in the UK, with seeing how it doubles every 2 weeks or so. I want you to hear more from Dr. Walensky about how the unvaccinated are at risk here.
We know our vaccines work against this variant. However, this variant represents a set of mutations that could lead to future mutations that evade our vaccine. And that's why it's more important than ever to get vaccinated now to stop the chain of infection, the chain of mutations that could lead to a more dangerous variant.
And we're already seeing this effect worldwide. The Delta variant is now present in 92 countries, Aaron.
Wow. More than 150 workers at a hospital in Houston have been fired or they've resigned over a vaccination requirement there. What's the latest there?
Right. So you'll remember that just earlier this month, a federal court threw out a case put up by employees of Houston Medical. They were saying they didn't want to have to abide by the vaccine requirement. And this was the first major U.S. healthcare system that we saw put this requirement into place. Now, yesterday was the marker in which the hospital was saying that workers needed to be vaccinated by. They called up some workers and asked if they had been vaccinated. If they said no, they were fired on the spot, while others, more than 150 in total, resigned of their own volition. Now, some of these nurses and employees at the hospital telling NBC News that they don't feel confident in the vaccine safety, and they're working to elevate this to the federal level. Aaron. All
right, Maura Barrett for us today with our COVID headlines. Maura, thank you.
For more on the pandemic, let's bring in NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Uche Blackstock. Dr. Blackstock, let's just kind of jump right into this Delta variant. I've spoken to health officials in Missouri on and off last week, and again in that state, they kept telling me that they are seeing an increase in hospitalizations and that the COVID patients hospitalized are way younger than before, 20 to 60 years old and often unvaccinated. Those are people who could get vaccinated if they wanted to. So what about this new variant and children under the age of 12 who are not able to get a vaccine, even if they or their parents wanted them to?
Right. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. You know, we don't have any signs yet that this Delta variant is more transmissible or more severe in kids than in adults. But obviously, it still is a risk. And so until children under 12 can be fully vaccinated, we need to ensure that the adults around them, as many as possible, are vaccinated, and then ensure that when children are in high-risk environments, such as crowded settings and indoors, that we are still abiding by preventive measures, especially in communities where the transmission is high and vaccination rates are quite low. We really have to make sure over the next few months that we're focusing on protecting our children.
In India, doctors there are reporting a new variation of the Delta variant, and they're calling it Delta Plus. They say that it is more transmissible than the original Delta variant. What do we know about that variant at this point in time?
Right. So we still don't know enough about the variant. We know that in order for it to be considered a variant of concern, it's supposed to be more transmissible or cause more severe disease or evade coronavirus antibodies. So it has one of those attributes. But again, those were just shown in lab studies. We need to see how does this variant, Delta Plus variant, behave in real life settings. We already know that it's present in about 8 other countries. But again, I think just like the Delta variant, we know that preventive measures work. We know that vaccination works. And also genomic surveillance is incredibly important to keeping track of these particular variants.
Daily vaccinations, those numbers seem like they are just dropping every day right now. Do you think that people might reconsider getting vaccinated given what we're seeing with the Delta variant? And I guess, are there any convincible unvaccinated people left?
Right. Yes. I definitely think there are some left, and we've seen this in some of the polling. There still are these wait and see folks out there who are waiting for full approval of the vaccines that will actually cause a shift in making them decide to get the vaccine. But there's also a tremendous amount of misinformation out there, and I think that is one area that the Biden administration is targeting, as well as continuing the incentives, continuing the outreach, especially among young adults 18 to 26.
All right, well, if anybody is looking for a good source to dispel misinformation, your Twitter account is one of my go-tos, Dr. Blackstock. It is always so informative. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We'll see you again soon.
New this morning, results are slowly coming in for New York City's first mayoral primary that used ranked choice voting. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams is currently in the lead, with civil rights lawyer Maya Wiley in second place this morning. One-time frontrunner and former presidential candidate Andrew Yang conceded last night, promising to work with whomever is elected. The city's use of ranked choice voting and counting absentee ballots mean it could take at least a week to learn the official winner.
Let's get a check at your morning news now weather.
Meteorologist Bill Cairns is joining us. We're hoping with a quieter forecast for the country today. Bill?
We are. So let me ask you guys, what's the hottest temperature you ever remember being in? Like ever Phoenix or Vegas?
I think I was in Palm Springs, and it got up to 106 or 7, something like that.
I'm from Georgia. I feel like I feel like I could beat that, right? I feel like 110 at least.
Probably, especially factoring the heat index in Georgia, probably felt like hotter than that sometimes during the summer. So the reason I'm bringing this all up is that, people in the Northwest have not experienced a lot of crazy heat waves, and they're about to get one that's going to be record-shattering. It'll probably be leading all the newscasts come this upcoming weekend. So we're going to talk about that a lot more in the week ahead, but that's probably the next extreme weather event we're going to deal with in the country. The thing over the next 2 days, just some severe weather in the Midwest, very typical summer-like weather. We got a little bit of rain in Illinois right now, no big deal. We'll have isolated severe storms from Iowa through Kansas. A chunk of Nebraska from North Platte to Grand Isle, maybe to Lincoln, could get some storms with damaging wind or maybe some large hail, but it's not a huge risk today. Tomorrow, we get a bigger threat of severe weather. This will be encompassing a good chunk of the Midwest. It leaves out St. Louis and Chicago. I think you're going to get your storms later at night into the early morning hours. But from Kansas City to Omaha to Des Moines, La Crosse, south of Minneapolis, you could deal with some large hail, damaging wind, maybe even a few tornadoes. Again, this is for tomorrow's forecast. And now about that heat wave. Now, because it's going to be such a record-breaking heat wave, it's kind of unusual, but they have they're telling people, trying to get people prepared. There's people that don't have air conditioning that they're worried about as we go throughout the upcoming weekend. So they have what we call an excessive heat watch is in effect for all of these people, mostly in Oregon and Washington State. So how hot will it get? Spokane on Sunday could be 104. Pendleton, Oregon could be 104 and 107. Even Seattle has an outside shot of getting up into the upper 90s. Portland should be over 100 degrees for at least 2 straight days. So this is very unusual heat. Portland's all-time hottest temperature, by the way, is 107, just to give you an idea of how unusually hot this is. And in a lot of these locations, this will be the hottest they've ever been in June. So for today's forecast, if you want beautiful, be in the Great Lakes or the Northeast. Absolutely incredible. It's like a fall, crisp morning. It'll be a beautiful, warm afternoon. And then tomorrow, we stay nice on the eastern seaboard. All of the hot weather is kind of in the middle of the country right now. But we'll have more on that record-shattering expected heat wave this upcoming weekend in the days ahead.
All right, we'll be talking to you a lot, Bill. Thanks.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.